So, hello everyone. Today I'm really happy to be sitting with the amazing Zosha Di Castri, composer, multi-instrumentalist, educator, and recent prize winner of the Guggenheim Fellowship. I'm really exciting that that you've been able to join me on this project, on this motherhood and artistry project, and I'm really excited that we've been able to make a piece together. So maybe first, if you don't mind, just talking a little bit about yourself, about kind of like your musical journey, maybe where you grew up and how your path kind of up to this day.
Great. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. It's really a meaningful project to me, and I've really enjoyed our collaboration as well as these conversations that we've been having. So for my musical path, I grew up in a small town called St. Albert in Alberta, Canada, out west. And I started playing music at a pretty young age, so doing Suzuki piano when I was 3.5. So I've been playing piano for as long as I can remember. My parents were very supportive of my interest in music. They're both teachers, but not professional musicians. My dad was a closet drummer in the basement and had a band with other fellow teachers. So I was around that, and my mom liked taking us to concerts of all kinds of music. We'd go to folk festival and jazz festival and classical concerts in the city. And then when I was a little bit older in junior high and high school, I participated in band and jazz bands. I played flute and oboe and percussion for a year, and I was mainly doing keyboard for the jazz piano for the jazz band. But there was a year we didn't have a drummer, so I played drums, which I was not particularly good at. I was a little too timid for the role, but I was enough at least to lay down the beat. So yeah, music has always been an important part of my life, singing in choirs, that sort of thing. And then in my final year of high school, I guess I didn't have a lot of background in theory in my study of music, but I always liked to improvise at the piano, just as a way to kind of express myself. And there was an opportunity to do a young composers project in my final year of high school, which my mom really encouraged me to do. And I thought this was a ridiculous idea because I was, a moody teenager and I didn't know how to necessarily write down my ideas. But she said, "Oh, worst comes to worst, you meet the composer in residence and they don't pick you." But in fact, I got picked, and it was great to have these lessons with Alan Gilliland and work towards writing a piece. And after I did that, I was really sort of hooked. So I had already signed up to do a bachelor's in piano performance at McGill University, but I immediately started knocking on the door of the composition professors to see if I could do a double major. And that's what I end up doing. And then eventually focusing more on composition for my graduate work. I did a little bit of time in Paris and then my graduate studies at Columbia University.
Great, yeah, wonderful musical journey.
That's the short version.
And now in New York City. Um,
Yes, yeah.
yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, maybe you can just talk briefly about, how becoming a mother has kind of influenced your artistic career and your musical path and your creativity, and kind of a little bit about the challenges of that. And yeah,
Sure, yeah. So when I have two children now, a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. And when I first became pregnant, I was a little concerned about how, with my first, how that was going to affect my career and identity as an artist, especially. I had this fear that, becoming a mother would mean that I'd have to stop what I'm doing, or people wouldn't take me seriously, or, was starting to have momentum with my career, and I wondered if that would all stop. And so during that first year, I ended up taking on some of the biggest projects that I've done. I don't know if I'd recommend this in the future, but I think it was more a pressure that I put on myself to prove to myself that I would be able to still continue to be an artist more than it was to prove to other people. I think that that was just a fear that I'd have a baby and then I'd stop and that would be it. So that year, I did a 1 hour new music theater piece with my partner and Ice. that also involved a large sculptural, a kinetic sculptural installation that the musicians perform on and manipulate. And we toured with that. And then I also wrote a big 25-minute piece for orchestra, narrator, and soprano. So that was a lot. And I was able to do that because I had a very supportive partner. But I think it was important for me that I just needed to do that to realize that it was possible to do both. And then my second child, obviously, I've had just recently. And it's been great. I mean, it brings a lot of joy to my life and I think perspective, whereas, before everything would revolve around a piece being due and it would seem like the end of the world if, something didn't turn out the way you wanted. I think it does kind of, having kids puts things in perspective. Um, but it's also very challenging at times to coordinate how to find time. You don't I don't necessarily have these sort of 4 or 5 hour blocks of time to write the way I might have before when I was a graduate student. It's much more interrupted or having 20 minutes here, an hour after bedtime. So I guess it's changed the way I work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't still do quality work. I think you just have to be organized and um, be able to come in and out of your ideas in a more fluid way rather than say, okay, I need 2 hours to kind of get in the zone. I don't really have that luxury anymore. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
and even more so now with the pandemic.
yeah, exactly. I mean, this is what we've all kind of been dealing with, like juggling a lot and like organizing time is just a really, really big factor, of course.
Hmm.
But I find myself, at least, before I had all this time to practice and work, but actually the really focused and time was not actually that different. It was, it was all
Right.
about the, oh, I have to do this before I can prepare, and then like getting distracted and this and that. And now it's just like I don't have time to get distracted. I have these 20 minutes where I can practice or compose or work and it's just like on and off.
Yeah.
In some ways, at least for me, like I've learned how to be more efficient with the time.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
so in some ways, that's a good way of focusing in. But
Yeah.
of course, challenges with yeah, finding also support system like family and friends. And but what I found out also recently, also talking with some other friends, is that really not being afraid to ask people for help. I
Yes.
think that's kind of like a fear. It's
Hmm.
like, I don't want to bother anyone, and but actually
Yeah.
people willing to help, and I feel like that's also been changing a bit in the past years. And you mentioned the pandemic too. This project was not really about the pandemic necessarily, but it kind of became that way, which is
Right.
also part of we're all in it, still in it together, and kind of had extra challenges. And I think for women, it's been particularly challenging having to organize even more the time and maybe follow a kid home at doing schoolwork at home, which is a new challenge that
Of
probably
course.
have to deal with before.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. Balancing it all. I mean, I will say though that having that kind of virtual community has been interesting. 'Cause when I had my first child, I think that I was the only one in my sort of group of friends or that I knew that was having children, and it felt very, very isolating, especially in that first year. No one really checked in, and it just felt, like I couldn't really leave, and I was working hard on these pieces. I felt connected to family, but in terms of sort of the music community, I felt a little bit cut off. And so even if this year has been hard for the pandemic, having these kinds of conversations with other musicians, even if it is over Zoom, has felt good to realize, we're not alone in these challenges of balancing our professional lives and managing family. And just to add to what we were talking about before, I think that what you were saying about asking for help is important. And for myself, especially in that first year, having family come, or if we were doing a tour, just having an extra grandparent there to assist with childcare was totally essential to me being able to say yes to those projects or having a partner who could, put in substantial hours with childcare so that I could have time to work. So yeah, I definitely would agree with that point.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And something else that came up in a recent conversation was I think that this is also changing. I think slowly, in terms of like composer residencies or even, artist residencies in general. That sometimes say like, oh well, you can't bring your kids or you can't bring an extra person. I think that's maybe slowly changing now, but that's like a big factor. I feel like, that is important, to have this point change, like to have been able to be able to bring, maybe a babysitter along for like a week or 2 weeks when you're working and have that opportunity there. And another thing that came up is basically that for like for for a man, like nobody wonders like, oh, does he have kids or not, or but for a woman that's such a big change, and it shouldn't be for other people to be like, looking at you differently if you have kids or not, because it's not like that for a man. So
Yeah.
um, that's another thing that kind of came up in recent conversations. Um,
I like what these sort of exchanges that we've been having, in that it's sort of musician to musician. Because I have felt, often there's that transition where in like a pre-concert talk, people ask like, how did motherhood change your music? Which sometimes can be okay, but it can also feel a little strange when it's a total stranger and then there's a whole audience of people in front of you and it has nothing to do with the piece that you've been asked to write. So to be able to frame the conversation ourselves and have that dialogue, I think it's nice to have this sort of separate space for that.
yeah, yeah, totally. And also like this, for me, this project kind of came from the idea of talking to some friends of mine, in the past few years, and this conversation about having a family came up a few times, and I had some friends say like, well, I really would like to have children, but I really don't think I can. Like I have to choose between career and family, and I found that to be very very sad and kind of disturbing that someone has to actually make that decision. And of course, for all of us, it is a challenge, but I think now it is possible, and there's more of a support system. And so I don't know. Maybe you can just talk briefly about your thoughts on how that's been changing, or how what would you say to a young person in the middle of a career, or maybe beginning a career, who is maybe thinking about having a family, but has this struggle, this internal struggle.
Hmm. Yeah, it's sort of too bad that that's still an attitude you hear younger musicians or composers putting forward, that they feel like there has to be this choice. I think a big part of it is having conversations like this and being able to see role models in the field of people making it work and who are also honest about what it involves. That not, you know, it, what's the word? Like that it's not necessarily easy, or that to present this pristine package of like, oh yeah, you just do it all and it's amazing. But yeah, having honest conversations about the kinds of compromises that need to be made or adjustments that have worked for us in the past, and sharing tips, I think that that's really productive to be able to do that. And of course everyone has their own choices about whether that's something they want or not. But I think that, yeah, making that more visible and less taboo. I think there's still this sort of feeling that maybe it's not something you can talk about. And I think in composition in particular, maybe we're at this sort of shifting moment in that, when I went to school and all my levels of education, I never studied with a woman. I just always had male professors, and that felt like a topic that was a little strange, or it would not be acceptable or awkward to talk about with them. So I think as more women start to become faculty members, that can also help for at least female composers who are going in the field and might be having those questions. I think it's a little bit easier to have those conversations. I'm not sure how it is as a performer, if your experience is different, but I think as a
Yeah,
composer, that's something that's on my mind.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And it's funny also, like in these conversations, something that came up a lot was that I feel like we all, like as soon as we had a baby, we were all still like already like doing something else, like
Yeah.
really really like, oh, like whether it's proving to yourself or proving to someone else, or
Hmm.
having this feeling of like, like I have to prove that I can do this and I can do this. And also for me, like I went on tour when he was like 2 months old, and it was very challenging. And I would say that now I would not do that again. The whole challenge of like breastfeeding in the
Sure.
office and the stage, and um, but
It's hard to anticipate, when you're expecting a child, you have no idea what it's going to be like or how, you know, if you don't want to say no to everything and then feel completely bored, but you don't want to also overcommit and you don't know necessarily the responsibilities involved. So I think especially with the first child, it is a little bit difficult. But yeah, with my second, I think I guess I'm also at a different place. I have my teaching job now, and um, yeah, I just consciously decide I'm not gonna do quite as much at that period. And with two kids, I think it'll be too much. It's okay if I take a year where I work on different kinds of projects, still trying to stay active creatively, but maybe not quite such massive undertakings and that require travel, and that sort of thing.
yeah, and then I feel like you get so good at juggling things and like shifting gears really quickly, and
Yeah.
I remember like just playing concerts, so extremely tired, but just knowing that I could still do it. And like before having kids, I remember like, oh, I have to get rest before this big performance, and I have to like, eat, a certain amount of
Hmm.
time before and prepare, and I have this whole thing. And now and then it's like I can do this even like super tired and like not having been able to have a chance to eat or whatever. Just uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
like
you develop a certain resilience and flexibility, I think that's impressive as mothers. And I think also, I mean, everyone experiences it differently, but in the very early years, as amazing as it is, it can also be sort of mind-numbing being around an infant. And so I think then when you do have those musical opportunities, even if you're tired, there's a sense of excitement to be, engaging and doing something creative and being with other adults, that is positive. So I think for myself, yeah, not completely cutting myself off was important, but I guess finding that balance also with not running yourself down with so much work that you feel you can't be present with your child and enjoy those early moments.
yeah, definitely, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Maybe just as a last question, I know you've written a few pieces kind of inspired by motherhood, and so maybe you can just talk briefly about them, or maybe even just about the piece that we've been doing together. How you kind of, what were your ideas behind it?
Sure, yeah. I guess, well, maybe even before this project, that orchestra piece I was speaking about before, it's called Dear Life. I was approached to write that in the first year of my daughter's life, and it's based on a short story by Alice Munro, and it's sort of one of her most autobiographical stories, and it's basically her retelling these recollections about a relationship with her. It's like a mother-daughter story. So in some reason, for some reason, that story sort of was interesting to me in that moment of becoming a mother, to sort of be reflecting on that and dealing with that text in particular. So that was maybe the earliest example of that. But then, yeah, this project that we've been working on, I got a grant during the pandemic. Canada Council had a digital originals grant, which was to try to still support artists during this period. And I was trying to find things that I could work on since a lot of my projects had been postponed. And that seemed like a good moment. And both yourself and Elise Tessier approached me within, I think, a week with quite similar ideas of doing something on music and motherhood. And it was something I had been thinking about too. So it just seemed like a ripe moment to investigate that. So I applied for this grant, thinking that I would do a podcast where I could do interviews with musicians, and maybe composers in the future about this theme, and then that I wanted to do collaborative duos at a distance because of COVID-19. And so the idea was I would make an electronic track. It's about 10 minutes long. I would send it to my collaborators. So I had 5 people that I wanted to start the project with, and hopefully it'll continue to grow. So I sent Olivia the track. She improvised a violin response. Actually, I think you sent me 2 possibilities. And then I edited that and mixed it, and then I recorded myself doing a piano response to Olivia's improvisation to make this new piece. And I like this idea that the electronic track would stay the same and I would send it to people, but then the piece could be quite transformed depending on the kinds of things that we get. And it creates this kind of musical dialogue as well as a spoken dialogue between my collaborators. So that's been really interesting to work on and to kind of piece together. It's still sort of in progress, but I really enjoyed what you did with the piece. So it was exciting to be able to collaborate, even if we can't be in the same city, I guess. And
Thanks. Yeah.
yeah, maybe just briefly, the title for that project is Dream Feed, the Dream Feed.
Oh, great. Yeah. And your electronic track is also compiled of certain field recordings, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a mix of electronic sounds and instrumental sounds, and then some sort of more personal field recording sounds like heartbeat from an ultrasound, yeah, from an ultrasound or from the kind of fetal monitoring that they do at the hospital, and different sounds I had recorded of my first baby in sort of the first month or two of her life. So those are sort of interwoven, but in a more sort of dense electronic texture. I think for people who have experienced them, that they would identify those sounds and know what they mean, but it doesn't necessarily leap out right away as being about that. And I kind of like that sort of coded meaning. I don't
Yeah.
know
No.
how you heard it though. You maybe you hear different things because I know where they come from.
Yeah. No. I love the track, and I think it was a really great way of collaborating. I know that we've had to had it in a distance, but in some ways, like sending these tracks back and forth have brought us closer. I feel like, and kind of
Yeah,
listening in a different way as well. So
yeah,
I'm really
totally.
I'm really excited about finishing the piece. It's basically almost finished.
Yeah, yeah, it should be released soon.
And we'll be releasing it soon. And I'm really excited about continuing this conversation, continuing this project. Really kind of try to create a larger community, and maybe really think about helping a future generation and talking about these issues that I think are not talked about very often these days, and really bring some more people together.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it would be interesting too to see these pieces. I mean, I like that we'll have these recorded versions that we've kind of sculpted in a careful way, but it would be fun to also perform these things live as improvisations where it could change and evolve. And I think that if those live performances happen, that it could also be an opportunity for further dialogue about these themes with a larger group of the people.
Yeah, I think that's a really really good idea. Yeah, and then these pieces will be shaped in a different way, which will be
Hmm.
exciting.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you.
I'm excited to keep talking about this, and yeah, thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
initiating it. Yeah, thanks, Olivia.